Hey everyone, David here. So my task was chosen randomly to be task number 1, which means that I have the opportunity to cut some lovely Jarlsberg cheese over here. And to cut this lovely Jarlsberg cheese, I have this lovely bowl that's been provided to me by my mom. I have this plate provided to me over here, and I have this fork that I'm going to be able to use to try and cut the cheese over here. So upon first observation with these 3 tools, I'm thinking that I'm going to use the plate to lay out the cheese to be the cheese board. I'm not really sure how I'm going to use the bowl as of yet. Maybe I can use the bowl as kind of like a scrap spot to put all of the skin on the outside of the cheese, or maybe I can use the bowl as perhaps even a dip. If I was going to have like a cheese plate, I could put something else if I was trying to serve stuff in. I'm not really sure how the bowl is going to come in play, but more importantly, my weapon over here, the tool to use to cut the cheese over here, I'm thinking that there are a lot of different ways that I could probably use this to cut the cheese. I'm thinking that this point over here, because it's kind of like pointed over here, it might be able to drive a nice wedge into the cheese because of the fact that we have a nice triangle shape over here to wedge into it. Or I could probably even try cutting the cheese lengthwise, like you'd almost like be cutting a piece of cake. And I also probably can try and even just use the force to press down to get the fork just to kind of like make some sort of piece of cheese. I think that I'm going to start with all 3 methods, see which one works best, and then continue on going that way. So I guess the first method that I'm going to try and use is I'm going to try and cut the cheese like I would normally cut a piece of cake. So here goes. So yeah, first thing I'm noticing is that because it is hard cheese, it's quite difficult to, even with one hand, to cut this. Even with 2 hands, like it's just barely going through. It's not a very good tool to cut. Obviously a knife would be better in this situation. And what I'm noticing, like on the other side over here, is the skin of the cheese is kind of like also making it difficult for the fork to cut this lengthwise. But I am going to continue to try and go all the way down just to see in a fair trial how much effort each part takes. Alright, so I've successfully cut the cheese, and I'm going to take the skin off and place the skin in the bowl to remove the waste. And I will then cut the cheese with the side end over here. I'm actually thinking now that once the cheese is cut, like I get a big slice, it's definitely going to be easier just to cut it into little pieces. I still do have to use 2 hands to get enough force, but to cut it into like little pieces over here. Alright, so attempt number 2 over here is we're going to try and use the end of the fork over here to see if that's a little bit easier to cut a piece. And I'm going to use the same exact strategy where I cut down the edge over here. So here goes. Let's see how this works. I'm going to try and use 1 hand to start with. And it definitely goes into the cheese easier. But I'm noticing that even though I'm trying to use it as a wedge, I'm getting half of the cheese over here cut, but it's not going through to the other side. Even if I use the side kind of as a lever over here, I'm not sure it's gonna, yeah, it's not cutting whatsoever through the skin over here. So I think I'm gonna have to, if I was to only use this end, I might have to kind of like almost use it kind of like a knife on the back end over here, where I can like try and poke holes down throughout maybe. And ooh, I can I got all the way through over here. I've kind of shifted to using the point of it to just the regular edge, just to see if it's possible to cut. And I almost... Alright, so we got our second piece of cheese over here by using the pointed end. Definitely not as effective as my first method of just cutting straight down through. And then again, if I was to try and slice this into chunks with the same end, I can hopefully just kind of drive a wedge down into it and cut, and kind of using the side of it more than I am the edge. I'm definitely noticing that the first method of using the edge, well, it seemed like it would never be optimal to use this to cut cheese. I thought it would be a little better than it actually turned out to be. So nice other couple chunks for this cheese plate. And the third and final method I'm going to try is going straight down with the, I guess, the bristles or the prongs of the fork over here. So let's see how this works. I'm going to press down all the way, and it definitely, because of the nice isolated edges, goes down nice and easily. But I notice now, I think I might have to use a little force just forward to try and pry. And actually this method is, well, it kind of made a nice little fork line. It quite easily got the cheese separated from the rest of the block. Although not very optimal for cutting a piece. I kind of have to just continue to stab until it has enough holes between the... Oh, this is fun. Should try this after work. And we have separation. So we have our lovely, inelegant piece of cheese over here, another piece over here, another piece over here. So of all the different ways that I've thought of to use the fork, I think that the most optimal one is, if you can get the strength, is to cut down. I'd say the second most optimal is using the prongs over here of the fork to push down. And whenever I take off a piece of the skin, like so, and I could just place that into my handy bowl over here. So that's all I'm going to cut for this activity, but this was my TPACK activity with cutting cheese that I got over here. And in terms of tools that I would rather have, a knife, I guess I mentioned earlier, would be optimal, but I think that even a spoon would be perhaps easier than a fork, because the spoon kind of has the same cutting power on the side, but it might, because of the fact it comes to a point more, would possibly be easier. Yeah, so definitely knife would be my favorite tool. I probably could have managed it with a spatula, or I guess it would be pretty hard with a wooden spoon, but I would have figured out a way. But I got the fork, and I'd say that my tool is, if it, out of 10, I'd give my tool a 6 out of 10 for how well suited to the task, while I say a 10 out of 10 would be a knife. And maybe a spoon could possibly be a 7, who knows. Maybe we'll do that again in the future. But all of my tools, the bowl, the plates, and the fork, were adequate for the task. I didn't see too much of a purpose for this, but it does hold the cheese there nicely, and that's all. So this was actually pretty fun. I now have a lovely cheese plate that I get to have now, and thank you for watching. So I just wanted to reflect a little bit based on the activity we just did and how it's kind of like related to TPACK. So while I was doing the activity, while I was cutting and I was using the tools, it was just making me think that it's so clear that, when you're using technology, if you design some sort of lesson and you use technology in a way that it is driving the contents, like, it may not be the most effective tool for the job. Like, for example, it could be teaching math, and you could be using an online video to teach math, but it might be a very hands-on subject like nets in math, where you really need to unfold all of it. And just because technology can teach it doesn't mean it should teach it. Like, for the whole idea of all of like using TPACK, you have to have the technological knowledge. But you also have to have not more importantly, but as importantly, the content knowledge of, what is best suited to teach the idea behind the content, and the pedagogical knowledge of how should you teach it, and do you know your students, and how do they best learn, what do you think would best get the job done. So the trinity of like all three of these concepts combined, it's really clear that like in using, for example, like my fork and trying to cut the cheese, I'm thinking, I have a pretty good content knowledge of how a fork can work, and as a result of this good content knowledge, I know ways that I could probably use it, even though a knife would be better for the job. So I have strong content knowledge of the fork, I have good technological knowledge, and I also have good pedagogical knowledge on how to teach the idea of what I'm doing. But even though I know all three, it doesn't really even mean that all three blend together until like the center area of TPACK. Like I have to consider, is what I'm doing the best tool for the job, and it's not. And it was very clear to me that during the reflection that it was not the best tool. Also, as opposed to like just a couple of educational decisions that I can see myself making as a result of this video, is I could totally see myself having the students do a challenge like this in the classroom, where they try and decide if like the tool that's presented to them is the best one to get the job done. So like having the students try and use a Allen wrench in the robotics and see if that Allen wrench is able to unlock a caps nut. So the Allen wrench I'm thinking of giving them would be too skinny, and they'd have to reflect on the idea of like, while this is a tool that could get the job done, it's the wrong size, so it's not best suited to like what's supposed to be being done. Like the students ideally would like metacognitively be able to see that like these tools could potentially work, but they're not the best possible one. So the whole idea of like relating this back to the classroom, I could totally see myself using it. I could totally also see myself continuing to, plan around the idea that, I've always used technology as a tool. I've never used it as just like this save-all thing that you need to use, but to just continue to be mindful of that idea. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed.